Hello everyone and welcome to Motorcast. Today we are here to look back on what was, it was a decent race really. The 2017 Austrian Grand Prix won't really be remembered for a classic, but certainly an interesting one nonetheless. Valtteri Bottas taking his second win of his Formula 1 career, and joining me to discuss all of the action following Austria, it's Tom F7.
Hello guys.
Just a two-man affair, unfortunately, for today, but hopefully we'll be back to full strength next time, of course, for the British Grand Prix. Let's talk Austria then, Tom, and just your kind of initial thoughts on what was, as I mentioned, probably not the best Grand Prix.
No, yeah, I agree completely. Like some of the races we've seen in the last few years, really only interesting watching the start and then the last 5-10 laps. But at the end of the day, we learned a lot. We have a lot to talk about, for example, right at the start, with obviously Bottas arguably getting the best start ever in F1. What do you think about that yourself?
It was pretty exceptional, wasn't it? There's, you can, like I said, how can you really get that much better than that? I mean, that was obviously hanging over the start of the race, wasn't it? Maybe a little too much in terms of everyone was just kind of waiting for the outcome of that. Not too much action on track. Maybe Vettel even waiting as well, really, just for a penalty to come rather than kind of chasing down Bottas.
Yeah, I think, if we take a look at the incident, and I'm sure everybody listening and yourself, you've seen, some information online, whether it's footage or, seen frame by frame. Bottas's car was moving before the lights went out, but the FIA say that they have a level of tolerance for how much the car can move before the lights have gone out, which I find very weird. But either way, I think, like some of the pundits have been discussing, he may have let go of the clutch before the lights went out, but he didn't start lifting off and obviously accelerating into turn one before the lights went out. So I think Bottas has got away a little bit with it, but in some ways, you look back at the replay and it's part of the gamble, right? It shouldn't be too mathematical, or not necessarily mathematical, but there should be a good element of risk and risk reward, right? And maybe that great perfect start he got is what caused him to win the race. I don't know. I mean, what's your opinion? Was it legal? Do you think maybe he's got away with something?
Yeah, I think he maybe has got away with it, like you said, in terms of what the kind of the wording of the kind of FIA, what they said on it. But I guess it's kind of good that he didn't get penalised, because it would have maybe ruined the race a bit. Vettel would have kind of, waltzed off with that win. Although maybe Bottas would have been pushed into that third place fight between Ricciardo and Hamilton. And kind of good to see that only 7.5 seconds actually cover the top four. And I think this is isn't this kind of characterising 2017, where we don't have the best cars in terms of racing. I think that's pretty clear in terms of the dirty air. But I think because we have quite a few teams kind of close together, it's really kind of making up for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've always said, over the last few years, that as long as there's a team out there who can challenge Mercedes, as long as there's two teams into battle, right, that's great. That's what we want to see, because it makes the racing more interesting. But yeah, you're right. Obviously, the new aerodynamics of these cars don't allow them to follow so closely, and therefore they don't allow them to overtake so easily. And it's clear to see. I mean, you look at, what was it, a 71 lap race? 50 of them laps, were just completely boring. Nothing was happening really. And that's part and parcel of F1, part of the circuit. Obviously, it's quite difficult to overtake, really only one opportunity. And you've really got to have a horsepower advantage, which, in 2017, even the likes of Renault, they're not that far behind anymore. So, yeah, I think these cars being closer, obviously a new philosophy in terms of the car designs, going back to cars that look very similar to, maybe around 10 years ago, but obviously a lot's changed since then with the slick tyres. It's allowed everybody to bunch up a little bit, which is great for the racing, like you said. I don't know whether maybe next year or 2019 they can fix part of the aerodynamics to ensure that we get closer, cars can follow each other much more closely. I don't know, but it might be just the nature of the speed of the cars.
It's difficult, isn't it, really, with, because the new owners of Formula 1, they kind of inherited these cars, didn't they, really? They didn't have much say. Chase Carey and Liberty Media, they didn't have much say really on these 2017 cars, and maybe they are a little stuck probably until 2020, 2021. I mean, they can change little things, but they can't tell the teams to build these really highly expensive cars for 2017 and then say next year, well, we're going a completely different direction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're right. They've inherited whatever you would call this a successful or a bad season or a bad philosophy of car. I think it's great. They were going in the right direction, and maybe it was just a bit little too late from Bernie Ecclestone's side of thing, and that's why, obviously, maybe partly why we've now got new owners. But yeah, I think obviously we've got to wait until the new agreements start rolling in, and obviously Ross Brawn, he wants basic engines again, so just combustion engines, none of this ERS, electrical energy units and MGU-H and all that stuff. So who knows, F1's got exciting years ahead of it, but in terms of the race, obviously it's a difficult track to overtake. I think that's just the bread and butter of it all.
Yeah, certainly with these cars. I mean, we've seen, the F2 race, GP3, that had a fair bit of overtaking. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I think on paper, it should be a really good track to overtake on. There's long straights, there's a bit of room in the braking zone, there's different lines you can take. But I guess just in reality with the DIS, yeah, maybe not so much. And in terms of overtakes, you could probably count them on one or two hands, really, throughout the race. But, one kind of big overtake that we did see was Ricciardo on the opening lap, real kind of... really got his elbows out, and really that was what won him the podium in the end. And Ricciardo's in really, really good form at the moment. We've kind of touched on this before, but I mean, I wouldn't really say he's in the form of his life. I'd still say that last year he was probably more impressive, but this year he's getting even more impressive results regardless. And I'd say this one was probably his best weekend of the year. I'd say this was probably even slightly better than his Baku win.
Definitely. I think obviously going back to the first point you made was about the overtake. Clearly, in the world of Formula One, the start is very important. Obviously, you don't want to be like Kvyat, where you ruin people's races, but you've got to make the most of the start. And it was very reminiscent of what he did in Baku, where he overtook the two Williams down into turn one. And it's them sort of bold, brave, but sensible and thought out moves that a driver like Ricciardo can clearly pull off, and we've seen this many years since he's been in F1, especially obviously at Red Bull. It's these type of moves that win you races, get you podiums, and arguably that Red Bull shouldn't have been on the podium at the weekend, but it was. So it's great to see. I can't remember your other points. I don't know if you asked me something else, but
no.
It's great to see. You were talking about the form, right? His form this year,
and Red Bull as well. That they've got close, haven't they, to the top two? I mean, you said it was, they probably didn't deserve a podium, but in the end of the day, they're only 6 seconds off. That's really good, isn't it? 6 seconds off the race win compared to where they were in Australia.
Exactly. I think, obviously, if Kimi Raikkonen was driving quite well, that would obviously have been third place. Hamilton didn't have his penalty, obviously. Ricciardo and Red Bull have seemed to close the gap a lot, especially since, I'd say, Spain sort of time. And I think that was the first podium he's had. He's had 5 podiums in a row now, hasn't he, Ricciardo? So, and I think, he was under pressure from Verstappen quite early on in the season. Obviously, Verstappen, it's quite difficult to compare the two because Verstappen doesn't seem to be able to finish a race, but in terms of what Ricciardo's doing, he's just doing as well as he can do. I think he outqualified Verstappen as well this Grand Prix, so that's good. I think they're really equally matched, and I think Ricciardo, he's just bringing the points home. Obviously, Baku was all out of luck, but I mean, I don't know what you make of Verstappen. I mean, where to start? All them Dutch fans.
We've got to be careful in terms of what we say about Verstappen, unless we want our hearts exact. I think for me, Verstappen has been very impressive this year and has just been really unlucky with reliability. I think it's a crying shame because I think, as you mentioned, they push each other along so well. There's such a real rivalry between Verstappen and Ricciardo. Many can argue that they are the two best drivers on the grid. People have put them above the likes of Vettel and Hamilton, and you really can make the argument, in these cars at least, that is the most exciting driver on the grid and arguably the highest quality. So we want to see them both, don't we, at the top with reliable cars fighting with Vettel and Hamilton.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they are by far the two who are going to be leading the next generation of great drivers. Obviously, we've got people like Sainz who, have potential, but we've not seen that yet. Obviously, Verstappen's won a race, Bottas can win, but Bottas is actually quite a bit older, and I guess actually Ricciardo's a bit older as well, but
there's 9 years between Verstappen and Ricciardo, but we use him in the same breath because Ricciardo still feels pretty new, and he hasn't got that championship-winning car yet, which I think it's fair to say he deserves. Talk about Bottas while you mentioned him. Does this bring him into the championship fight, or is it kind of he did the same thing in Russia. Hamilton had a penalty, drove a great race, but is he really going to go on and win this championship or challenge for this championship?
I think that's a question you need to ask Toto Wolff. But honestly, in my opinion, I think mathematically looking at it, he's 15 points behind Hamilton, 35 behind Sebastian. It's a bit far off Sebastian, but then, realistically, 15 points is nothing in F1. Obviously, that's how far he's behind his teammates. So I think it's all about how Mercedes are going to play this. Last year, or the last 3 years, they've had the championships in the bag. It's not been a question who's going to win in terms of constructors, and also with the drivers, it was either one of Rosberg or Hamilton. So now they have a threat from Ferrari, and if they start fighting each other, we'll look at what happened obviously in 2007 with McLaren. Do they think that could happen again? So I think Bottas, it's going to be very much a case of race by race, right? So if maybe, for example, Hamilton has a race retirement in Silverstone, and say Bottas wins, the tides change. But let's see what happens. I think it's too difficult to judge, and I think when we come towards the end of the season, it is going to be like, well, if you make one mistake, that's it. You have to support your teammate.
Yeah, which is how it should be, isn't it? They shouldn't have that kind of that buffer to kind of, we can make mistakes still in the championship fight, and that's great having that pressure from Ferrari. It's pushing Mercedes forward as well, I think, to really maximise their potential. They can't rest on the laurels like maybe they could have done the kind of last 3 years. It really is a championship fight, and Bottas, I would say, is definitely in that fight. Whether or not he's going to win it is a different question, but if he can just keep pushing, keep a mathematical possibility, then there's no reason why Mercedes won't give him a chance, because I think that's more their philosophy, to kind of give both of them an equal chance, but not to the point where it gets in the way of them costing points. So if Bottas gets asked to move over for Hamilton again, then I think he will do it. But they're not going to kind of be like engineer their whole team around Hamilton like for Ferrari do with Vettel. So difference of philosophies certainly for Mercedes and Ferrari, and we kind of talked about this before recording, between the different philosophies of Mercedes and Ferrari, and we're kind of talking with another off weekend for Raikkonen. Does this kind of doom Ferrari to fail in the constructors? Is all their focus really on the drivers? I
mean, my opinion is that Ferrari, obviously, they have not won anything in terms of a title since 2008. So for a team like Ferrari, they've such a, I don't know, but it's almost an honour for them to be in F1. That's how they look at it. They're very prestigious, right? So they need to be winning. So I think, if at the end of the year maybe they win the drivers but they don't win constructors, I think they'll be happy with that. A lot of people look at the drivers as the winner of the season. You never see, Mercedes won F1. No, it was Hamilton won or Rosberg won the championship. It's so that's sort of how people look at it. So I think as long as they win something, but I think, like we said before recording, Kimi Raikkonen isn't doing a good enough job for them to win the constructors, and that's going to be a big problem. And is this going to force them to change their driver lineup for next year? I mean, what do you think about Kimi Raikkonen in general? I mean, he has some great radio banter, but in terms of the race pace, he's not what he was.
From what I've read from kind of interviews with Beni, with people in the Ferrari team, purely as a fan as well. I'm not going to act like I have any knowledge of the inside, certainly don't. I think most people are in the dark as well, but from what I've just kind of read, what's available to everyone, it looks like he's staying. It looks like they're going to take up the option. Raikkonen, it's kind of in his hands. I mean, we've talked, I think we both want a change. If we were in charge of Ferrari, we certainly would. I don't think there were really that many arguments for keeping Raikkonen, to be honest. I mean, he's not going to take points off Vettel, but the problem is he's not taking points off Hamilton, like Bottas is taking points off Vettel. So, for me, a change is needed. They really seriously need to look at different options. And the other guys really that want that seat really have to start performing. I mean, I'd say Perez was unlucky. I think he was a bit silly really in Monaco, unlucky in Baku. But seems to be doing the job most of the time. Carlos Sainz is someone with a lot of potential, but he's having a bit of a sloppy season, really. He's shown, really good flashes of speed. He was great in China. But what he did in Baku, kind of that silly spin on the opening lap, and then Austria, things not going his way.
I remember in Bahrain as well, where he went into Lance Stroll out the pit lane. It's like, is that something you want when you're, looking to sign a Ferrari driver? I don't know. But...
Exactly. I mean, I think Sainz has the capability, but it's kind of frustrating because he's not fully showing it. You look at Hülkenberg, well, he's probably locked in at Renault. Grosjean, probably an example of someone who's stepping up the game, I'd say. I mean, he's been complaining about brakes all season, but we might as well talk about him now because he had a fantastic Grand Prix. 6th place, we won Formula 1 Grand Prix too, was the quote from Grosjean. He kind of won the B race.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that headline and I was like, you know what, fair enough. I mean, I didn't see any of him on the television. I don't know if it was just me, but I didn't see any of it. But he was just there, slowly doing his thing, very much like Bottas. He just goes about his business. He doesn't need to have all the press on him, or he doesn't like that. And, yep, they did the best they could possibly do, which is behind the top 3 cars. And obviously Force India did very well, 7th and 8th, and Williams as well. I don't know if we want to talk about
on it from qualifying.
I think what was it, 17th and 18th on the grid. They both jumped up to 9th and 10th, I think, on the first lap, and that's where they finished. And obviously, good old Jolyon Palmer in his 11th place. I think he was like half a second
behind. A good
behind.
Race, yeah. I think it's fair to talk about Palmer because he's been woeful this season. Let's not put it any other way, but I think this was a bit more promising. He was fairly close to Hülkenberg in qualifying, as was Van Dorn as well to Alonso, and both of them had decent races. I mean, let's talk about the penalty for Van Dorn, because Van Dorn got a drive-through penalty for ignoring blue flags. Danny Fiat got the same penalty for taking 2 cars out in turn 1 when his race was already done. He was pretty much a lap down, I think. Took the penalty, obviously it made no difference. I mean, what's going on there, Tom, with the consistency really with the stewards? But that kind of stuff happened.
It's difficult. I mean, I think I don't know if Kvyat did get any penalty points, but I'd like to think he did, because it was quite a stupid move. It was obvious that it was always going. They both got penalty points. Okay. I didn't see Van Dorn on the TV. I didn't see him actually holding people up, or maybe I saw a glimpse, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I wasn't like, come on, what are you doing? Like, I think there was Perez or Ocon who was holding up Bottas at one stage in the race, and I was like, what is he doing? But I didn't see that with Van Dorn. But if he was holding up, if he was not playing by the rules, then fair enough. But yeah, I mean, is that type of incident the same offence in terms of severity when you compare it to the first one collision? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that? Obviously, it sounds like you don't agree with the stewards.
No, I really, really don't. With what Fiat did on the opening lap compared to Van Dorn, I think. I mean, this is a question for you, Tom. I'm gonna throw it straight back with blue flags, because I know this is probably Crofty's favourite topic. He does like to mention it quite a lot. But he makes a point. Unfortunately, just makes his point like every Grand Prix and every 5 minutes. But do you think we need to get rid of them, or do you think really it would A, ruin races, and B, just kind of confuse everybody and and kind of make it a bit too artificial, really?
I think you've got to look at it at both angles or both sides or perspectives. So I get where people are coming from. If there's a battle for the lower point positions and it's being ruined because the incredibly fast Mercedes is coming through, then okay, that scrap's been ruined. But if we suddenly had blue flags being diminished, and suddenly Bottas would not be allowed to get past, I think it was like Perez, and I think he was trying to overlap. He was trying to overtake somebody.
Yes, Perez was being pretty robust in his defence of his lapped status.
If, say, he didn't have to let him through, then no doubt Sebastian Vettel would have got right onto the back of the Mercedes. Now, that makes the racing more entertaining, but is that fair? I don't think it's fair. I think if you can't develop a car that's fast enough to keep up with the front runners, then you need to, in my opinion, make way and get out the way, because the fight is for the win. It's not, yeah, great, if you're fighting for 10th place, that's good for you, but no, most people care about the winner, and that's the main goal of the race, to win.
And it's the same for everyone. It's not biased to teams. It just, I guess, happens that those teams are, the ones, up there. And it's, if Verline, for example, is getting a lot of blue flags now, well, if he moves up into a top team, he'll then benefit from the blue flags.
Exactly. Right? It's fair play, FIA.
Certainly with this generation of cars as well, when it's so hard to overtake, we could literally just see a train forming behind a lapped car, and in my opinion, that's a little too artificial. So if we worked with the cars to get them, they can follow each other, they can overtake, then I'd say then fair enough, we could look into getting rid of blue flags. But for now, it feels like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to try and spice up the sport, when really they probably need to focus a bit more on the cars rather than the flags, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the complete same. I just think, it's got to be, F1's got to be tough and fair. That's the way it should be. If you can't develop a car that's fast enough to not get lapped in a race, then you've failed your job, right? You're meant to design a car that is the fastest, not the one that finishes 2 laps behind. So if you can't be fast, then you should pay a price, which is obviously the blue flag. So in my opinion, I don't think it's really an argument that needs to be had. But anyway, I guess if we get back to the race a little bit, because some people listening might be a little bit like, well, they've gone on a bit of a tangent. But no, Crofty does mention this a lot, and it does annoy me a bit. I think if we talk about maybe the last 5 or 10 laps, obviously we had Hamilton, who was returning from a poor grid position because of a penalty. Whether or not that had anything to do with Vettel's contact, we don't know. But he was trying to obviously catch up to Ricciardo. And then we had obviously Vettel trying to pursue Bottas for the win. So I don't know what you thought about either of the battles. What did you think about how Hamilton was driving today in general?
I think the tyres played the part they should do for once. I think at certain times we've kind of seen it doesn't really matter what tyre you're on, or everyone's on the same strategy, or the ultra softs can do the whole race. But I kind of felt like we did see, we saw blistering for Bottas, and we kind of saw the tyre management was pretty important in terms of Hamilton. Well, obviously it was unlucky with the gearbox penalty. I do believe Toto Wolff said that it wasn't as a result of the Vettel contact in Baku, but of course we probably don't know for complete certain. He recovered well, I'd say, but really he overtook Perez on track, jumped Raikkonen in the pit stops. Raikkonen was more used to kind of try and slow Bottas down, who's more of a tool, I think, in this race, really than a driver. So great, he beat Perez and Raikkonen.
It wasn't a great day at the office, that's for sure.
No, he was fortunate that Bottas beat Vettel, because otherwise he'd have lost out 7 points there. So I think all in all, good damage limitation from the Mercedes team, not necessarily Hamilton. Although, is it a bit too kind of harsh to say that he should have beat Ricciardo, Tom?
I don't know. I think obviously for whatever reason, I think this is one key thing that I have when I say against Hamilton, because I don't want to upset Hamilton fans. My biggest issue with Hamilton is that he's not mentally that strong, I don't think. I think there's a lot of drivers like that. I think they let things worry them too much, and you could see the whole weekend he just wasn't himself as such, And also, whenever we're on the radio, I know, in the heat of the moment, everybody says things or acts differently, but he always seems a lot more frustrated or agitated by something. And I think today, or this Grand Prix, we saw that Hamilton, when he's not on it mentally, when he's not riding that wave, he just, he isn't this invincible character that a lot of people say he is.
And after the race being pretty dramatic as well, and saying the championship was over, when quite clearly it's not. 20 points. Vettel's probably got a grid penalty later in the season, probably got a crash later in the season. it's not over, is it?
I think, even if we were back on the old point systems where we had 10 points for a race win, 2 race wins behind, it sounds a lot, and it is, but that's, halfway through the season, that's still close. I don't see that. So even though, we're on the new point system now where it's 25 for a win, so like you said, Sebastian has a bad race, and he's right in front again, he's leading, so... Yeah, I think it's that mental side that Hamilton seems to lack a little bit. I don't know whether it's because he was really affected by the collision with Vettel, and obviously Vettel being, quite a strong character, maybe he just lets it, water under the bridge or whatever. But I think getting back onto the actual racing, and, Hamilton had an average day, and that isn't good enough to win a championship, obviously. I think he should have got past Ricciardo. I think, Renault have done a lot of work on the engine. Red Bull obviously know they have to sort of balance their car in a way that makes the most of the horsepower they have, so they maybe run a little bit less wing, but still, I think there was the penultimate lap where Hamilton really should have got him, and he should have just gone really deep into the corner, but Ricciardo's a difficult person to overtake, so I think it's a bit of both. You've got to say Ricciardo did really great to defend, and Hamilton maybe didn't push hard enough. But yeah, I guess if we maybe start to wrap off and talk about the battle for the lead, if you have anything to say on that.
Entertaining, wasn't it? It was a bit of deja vu, of course. Similar kind of to Sochi, and I guess, Hamilton was 4th in Sochi as well, and a bit off the pace all weekend as well. Hamilton seemed to have the pace as well. I mean, he set the fastest lap. I think it's like his 5th fastest lap of the year, which, doesn't obviously mean that much, but I think a bit different to Russia in this respect. But Hamilton wasn't so much off the pace, but kind of just more struggling in the race for kind of, a tyre life. Lead battle, Bottas and Vettel, of course. Fairly entertaining to watch. I didn't feel like Vettel was going to take the win at any point, to be honest. I felt like Bottas kind of had it under wraps, but of course one mistake and Vettel would have snuck through. Vettel probably couldn't have really done much more, probably kind of lost the race in the opening stint. And just a real strong drive from Bottas, really, and he's probably my driver of the day. Ricciardo's also up there as well, but yeah, I'd probably say Bottas is my driver of the day. Just a great qualifying and a really good race, so well managed, and this is a real good trait that Bottas seems to be developing in terms of getting out front and really controlling the race. Yeah,
I agree. I think he obviously doesn't seem to bottle it at all, which is good for him. Maybe it's part of being Finnish, if that's the right way to say it. He's a Finn, obviously. He's very cool. I don't know whether it's to do with the temperature in their countries, but he's Iceman, and he's the next Iceman. We all know this. Kimi Raikkonen's gonna retire, and Valtteri Bottas will take up the crown. I don't think if I heard Vettel said if he had another lap he'd have got him. Maybe, but I think it's so difficult to overtake, and Bottas.
And he's managed it, hasn't he, to perfection, to like the lap,
Exactly, right. I think Bottas is a very clever guy, and he, knows what he's doing. He's maybe new to winning, but he's been in F1 a lot, and he's had, he's always had a good teammate, I think. I think he had Rubens once, and then he had Massa. He's had these people who've been up there before, and obviously Hamilton's maybe another step higher up that pecking order, but either way, he seems to be doing well and going about his business. But yeah, I think Sebastian did well. I think, like you said before about the tyres, it's great to see that on one set of tyres maybe Mercedes have the advantage, but when the shoe's on the other foot and the super softs come out, it's Ferrari's game.
Precisely, and of course I think Silverstone the next round, the super softs are kind of the headline tyre, if you will, in terms of super soft medium. So maybe A, that's going to play into Ferrari's hands, but B, I think more importantly, this is a bit of a Hamilton track, isn't it, really? He's won the last 3, I want to say, around here. Should have won in 2013 as well with that puncture. Can they stop him? Because Vettel doesn't seem to have the best record around Silverstone either, so is it going to be a bit of Bottas versus Hamilton, maybe?
I think Hamilton needs to win the race and he needs to dominate it. I think, if he can get on pole, obviously barring any penalties, and hopefully he won't have to have another grid penalty, but he's on pole, he's leading the race, that's where he wants to be, and that's what he'll need to do for his championship. But it could be a deciding race. I think if Vettel wins, extends the gap above 30 points, whatever, that's when maybe we could start to see tides changing. So I think Silverstone's going to be a key race. It's definitely one where Hamilton can end on a real positive, even if, say, Hungary doesn't go that well. You can end this summer or go into the summer quite positively. So I think it's going to be an interesting race. I didn't say my driver of the day for Austria, so I'm going to choose... there's so many great drivers, right? Who had good races. I think Grosjean's a good shout. I think Magnussen's a good shout as well. Magnussen drove really well. Definitely not Kvyat. I think that's not a great shout. Verline as well, right? Did well to overtake his teammate, even though he started in the pit lane. But I think Bottas deserves it for sure, especially after that great start. Whether or not it's legal, it was very, very good.
Yeah, and in terms of race rating, I'd probably give it around a 4 or 5. Not the worst race of the season.
Maybe. I can't. What would you say is the worst race?
I go with Sochi personally.
Okay.
I was not the biggest fan.
Ironically,
of that race,
both of the races which Bottas has won, so he's not the most interesting driver.
And probably the first driver in history. This is not a record, but I know it's a fact. But I'm just going to say it's a fact anyway. Probably the first driver whose first 2 wins were won by less than a second.
Wow. Okay.
And probably the same driver as well. Bottas, Vettel. And teammate in 4th. That's got to be a record, surely. No one could have done that before, surely.
No, I think that's great precision to win by less than a second. Like you said, he manages the gap to a T.
Exactly, and that's pretty much where I think we'll leave this episode with a bit of positivity around Bottas, which of course is great to see after Hamilton and Vettel stole the show in Baku. Austria, I think, well and truly belonged to Valtteri Bottas. Goodbye.